Haha. Okay, great.
It's great. And we start the session with with me going, aha. Always good. Good morning, everyone. It's an interesting time at the moment, isn't it, for many of us? Not just me, I know. Right. So, what we're talking about today. So I'm having lots of fun, as you know, at uni. And this week, I'm mostly learning biomechanics, which, as for those of you that have been with me for a long time, and most of you have, is going to be fairly hilarious because we don't really subscribe to the doctrine of biomechanics. So they said there's 4 elements to the spine, 3 of which I completely agree with, and 1 of which I completely don't. So we're having lots of fun because, and you'll know this from previous sessions, that you know, 1 is protection. Of course it is. The spine is protecting the spinal cord, and it's protecting all our viscera and all of this stuff, and it's keeping us upright, and it's doing all its movementy things. And the 4th one, of course, is shock absorption. And this idea of, yeah, I can see Lisa laughing already. She's like, I saw this coming. Shock absorption. So basically, the more you walk throughout your life, the more messed up you are by the age of 50, and then it's curtains for you. So this idea that when we're walking, the low spine just gets squashed and squashed and squashed, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about that. So our session today is all the things that you can do about that. Can we stop gravity? No, we can't. Can we stop aging? Sadly, no. I'm working on it, but no. But we can take steps to hydrate the tissues, and we've got this lovely intervertebral disc with its, you know, nucleus pulposa, which is a great word. It's my new word of the week, pulposa, because it sounds all juicy and squashy. So what do? And actually we can use the thing that, or the force that robs us of this space to our advantage, simply by changing our orientation in gravity and then allowing those nice squashy part spine to just, you know, great sound effect. You know, we can just allow the hydration from the rest of the body to just get sucked back into the places where it's needed the most. It does take time. It takes a lot of effort. General consensus now is that you want to be laying on the floor doing this stuff for about an hour a day. So our once a week effort is okay. But if you can take a few minutes each day, maybe at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, just to lay with the knees bent and soles of the feet into the floor and just tilting the pelvis and rolling the head. And those acts alone start to allow space to come back into the spine. Because yes, when we are standing up, we've got the force of gravity coming down through us, which is going to take space out of the spine. And yes, every time our heels strike the ground, there is a force that comes up through the body. But how we distribute that force, we can be a bit more intelligent about that. Does it need to just land in the low spine and stop there? No, it doesn't, because we are a force distribution system. So can we let the ripple of our heel strike come all the way through the body and out through the crown of the head? And this sort of creates some interesting mental images about how we might be walking in gravity if we were allowed to just move our spines well. So let's have a think about that today. And I'm going to go and find my mat, which is hopefully within the screen. So just taking a little bit of a mess around here. And we've been talking a little bit about hard floors as well, and making sure that you've got enough padding, because I'm here, as you know, in Italy, and I'm on a stone floor, which is significantly more unforgiving than I'm used to my carpeted. Oh, there's my glasses. I'm used to my carpeted floor at home, and it feels very different on the feet, and it certainly has a very big impact, a very different impact on the low spine and how my low spine feels, how my pelvis feels, spending time on these harder floors, which of course are useful in a warm country, because it's not at the moment, by the way, for everyone. Keep hearing that from people. They're like, oh, Italy, lovely. No, it's not. It's actually 5 degrees here this morning, which is a bit brutal. So not bikini weather, but it will be in the summer. It will be hot, and the hard floors are useful for that. So your body is designed to mold itself to your environment, the feet particularly. So we have to create arches of the feet. We have to create curves of the spine when we're on the hard floors, making sure that we've got enough padding underneath the bony parts that are connecting to the floor. But when we just feel the feet, let the toes go long and the heels can sink and all of that stuff. And we're just feeling that the sit bones can pull down into the ground. And when we do that, can we start to feel that there's this slight shift in the pelvis? There's a tilt to the pelvis. The tummy between the hip bones sinks back. So let that get nice and soft. Releases the hip flexors on the front. And in letting the front of the tummy sink back, while the curve of the spine kind of comes up to meet sort of behind the belly button. So if we think about our tummy and our belly button, sort of take our mind's eye into the abdominal cavity, and we pull down on those sit bones, tilts the pelvis, and we can feel that very, very low spine, that kind of sacrum, L3, L4, L5, and the L3, L4, so sort of below the tummy button area, just starts to tilt inwards a little bit. And it's almost like the sacrum, or the top of the front part of the sacrum, we think about that as one of those nodding duck things. It kind of just, the nodding duck just nods forwards towards the back of the pubic bone and the back of the tummy, so the inside front of the body. So can we just feel that tilt starts to happen? There may be a response up in the ribs, so we want to work with that broadness of the back of the ribs. If you know that your ribs are a bit flary, it's a technical term, pokey up towards the sky, then just use the hands on the ribs just to bring the front of the ribs down and back into the tummy where they belong. We get a little bit stiff on the back of the ribs quite a lot. So can breathe into that and just soften the muscles there. Let the shoulder blades come down into the ground. And just let the nose drop into the back of the head. We can draw a line straight back from the tip of the nose into the back of the head. And that relaxes the jaw and the very, very top of the neck. And we know that the top of the pelvis, where it meets the low spine, is reflected by the base of the skull and where it connects with the spine. So there's a very physical connection, but also a correspondence that happens between the base of the skull and the top of the spine, and the relaxation in the tissues that we can feel there. And that very, very top of the pelvis, where it connects the base of the spine. So can we let, there's a lot of softness that has to happen kind of through the deep guts, if you like. If you want to explore with your hands, find your pubic bone and just let the fingers sink very gently above the pubic bone into that, very soft abdominal area. Can we use the weight of the fingers to create space there? And for a lot of us, there's a lot of tension in between the hips and in that soft area, or what should be soft area of the tummy. So can we let that just sink and soften? We don't want to be too pokey with it, but just be gentle. And as the tissue soften, can we feel that the sacrum maybe gets a little bit more freedom, the base of the spine maybe gets a little bit more freedom? And how does that translate behind the tongue? It's not a typo. How does that translate behind the tongue, in the very, very back of the nasal cavity, right in the very, very back of the head, in that base of the occiput, base of the skull? It's quite difficult to sort of talk and teach at the same time as doing this, because it starts to get very, very soft. And where else in the spine do we start to feel that there's a spaciousness opening up? And that's going to be different for all of us. For me, my very, very tight spot is at the base of the thoracic, top of the lumbars. Getting space in there sometimes is a bit tricky. So as we go to the nearest point, or nearest accessible point, which is occiput and the base of the skull, and then the base of the spine, maybe we start to get a little bit more space in the parts of the spine that haven't got as much space as they would like. And this takes time. If we were doing this with someone like John Stoke, we'd probably be here for about 90 minutes, but we're not going to do that today. But letting the tissues respond, being respectful enough to the body to grant it enough time to respond. It doesn't respond in the time that our fast-paced world is looking for or requires or celebrates. You know, everything's so fast all the time, but actually the body isn't like that. The body is slow. And it's interesting just to pause and to wait in these moments, in these movements, and just notice what's going on and where your attention gets drawn to. It's interesting, when we've had interventions in the body, we're drawn to that site immediately. But when we pause and we wait, then other parts of the body start to call for our attention, maybe under the edge of a shoulder blade, or maybe one of the ribs, or maybe a point at the very top of the neck where the neck meets the ribs at the CT junction. Maybe down in a hip somewhere, maybe but down all the way down in the big toe. But in these acts of letting go, and by letting go, I mean letting go of the expectation or letting go of preconceived ideas. We always have this chatty mind that's like, you know, this is bad, that's not so good, this bit's had this done, this bit's had that done, you know, this bit's a bit weak, or this bit's, you know, holding on too much. When we let those bits go, that chatty mind go, and we get led by the body into the places where it requires our attention, not when we're imposing our will. And notice what's happened to your breath since you laid down. And just notice the changes in the breath, which of course impacts on the nervous system. Can we allow the nervous system to just stand down? Last year was a challenging year for many of us, and taking our nervous system out of high alert takes conscious effort and a practice. So as we feel that lengthening to the spine is happening, maybe it's reflected in the feet, and we start to feel that the feet are a little bit longer. Can we leave the knees where they are and just roll the feet? It's not a big movement. It's almost like the cat's, you know, padding on the sofa, on the cushion, sofa cushions. My lovely May, who I'm missing terribly, loves a fluffy blanket. She loves to get the claws into the fluffy blanket. And can we let our feet do something similar? And we just start to feel, because as the center of the foot, the toe processes of the foot, the more space we get between the toe processes of the foot, the more space we get in the spine. So that's the joints in between the bones in the feet, the more space we get in the spine. And the more space we get in the spine, the more space we get in the feet. They're affected by and of each other. So can we let the hands just rest on the hips? Let the elbows rest into the floor. Collarbones can slide off the edges of the shoulders. That gives more space to the well of the throat. And we can just pull down through the outer side of the right foot and let the thigh drop back through the hip socket and take the knee out to the side. And again, not a big movement, because we're always letting the thigh drop back into the connection into the side of the low spine. Legs are plugged in through the pelvis into the underside of the diaphragm. The big toe joint pulls down into the ground to bring the knee back to the center, and we can work through on the other side, left foot. And the big toe joint can pull down, the inside of the heel pulls down, takes us back to the center. So just changing over sides, just taking time to explore, can we leave a nice heaviness through the solar plexus, through that V shape? We were exploring that last week, that lovely V shape in the front of the chest, front of the ribs. Can we let that just sink back? It's like dropping stones into the pool of T12. More space we can feel there. When the tissues relax, it gives the bones time to sort themselves out. You know, bones get pulled out of place by the tissues, not the other way around. And again, just notice what's happening with your breathing. When we're concentrating, sometimes we stop breathing, and that's okay. The breathing just takes a back seat for a moment. So the next time the knee comes out on the left side, come back to the center and just notice how the body feels. We're just going to allow the right knee just to float in towards you. We're letting the sit bones be nice and heavy. And we've got this lovely wavy knee. We can let the right ankle just float to the outside of the left knee. And if we can, just leave the left knee alone. If it dips in to meet the right ankle, just come back and start again. We want to go through this frame by frame. So we've got this lovely heavy left foot and the knee. And it's quite interesting because definitely for me on the right side, the knee likes to come in and meet the right ankle. So the right leg doesn't have to do as much. An interesting process. And once that ankle is just caught on the outside of the left knee, just let the legs drop back through the sockets again. And again, we just give the tissues time to respond between the sit bones. Time to respond. The toes look up towards the sky and just be aware of the sole of the foot, aware of the space in the ankle, aware of the space in the back of the knee. it might be nice for the left thigh to come in through the socket of the pelvis. Maybe the legs float in towards you, but notice what's happening in your tummy to facilitate that. The sit bone's still going long and down. We've still got integrity to the inside of the ribs and the diaphragm. So we've still got that lovely spinal curve that we created. It doesn't change. And noticing the muscles that need to be employed in the abdomen to make this happen. Can we bypass the front of the legs just a little bit and take ourselves into the front tummy and the inside of the abdominal cavity? So we've got this kind of long waist. So when the foot comes back down, again, let the foot settle, let the back of the pelvis settle. We release the foot. And we find the right foot. So we let the right foot sink, let the right hip sink into the ground, because it's this stabilizing factor that allows the left to be free. And again, we've got space in the front of the hip as the knee comes in towards us. And it's just taking the weight of the leg and dropping back into the pelvis, and taking the weight of the leg and dropping back into the pelvis. Find that lovely wavy knee. It's interesting because we can notice so many compensatory patterns here. How much bracing happens around the hips when we've got a wavy knee, got an unstable limb over the top of the pelvis, and all of a sudden all sorts of things start to get involved. Do we need it that much? Not really, because when the leg is in gravity through the pelvis, it is stable. So as the ankle comes to the outside of the knee, can we leave the right knee where it is? Doesn't need to come and meet the ankle. Actually, the left leg has to do a little bit more work to get to where it's going. It's interesting to notice that. And the toes are up to the sky, and we've got this space in the ankle. So we've got this very, very active foot. And maybe the legs come in towards you, maybe they don't. It doesn't matter. What we are interested in is the broadness between the sit bones. We've been talking about this a little bit recently. How when we're in the fight and flight response, the tail gets drawn under and the sit bones get pulled together. So we get this sort of, pointy pelvis, if you like. Signals to the body that we're in danger. Signals to the brain that we're in danger. That's not useful over time. So can we allow ourselves to be in a vulnerable state? We're at home, so should be absolutely fine. But just noticing that stages of relaxation in the body as the nervous system starts to stand down. But it takes its cues from our physical body. It's really important that we understand that the nervous system cues the body, but the body also cues the nervous system. So if we've got tight parts of the body, got muscles holding on around the pelvis and the thighs, we've got muscles holding on around the neck and the shoulders, then that is signaling to our nervous system that all is not well. So taking these times to allow there to be a broadness and a relaxation to the body, that we're held within gravity and supported by the floor, cues the nervous system that all is well, and it doesn't have to be quite so alerty. Hi, Joanna.
What if on the right side, that hip, I mean, I can get it there, but it's not going there on its own, that leg. So should I just let it rest where it is?
Yeah.
Or should I do something else? Because on the left, I've always known I've got so much more mobility, and my left hip is happy to to do pretty much anything.
Yeah.
The right one has got a different range.
Yeah.
And where you've got that different range and you do that outward rotation,
yeah,
if it, I mean, really, it just gets to the point where it wants to rest against my inside of my other leg a little bit.
yeah,
Or should I adjust until it's over my?
yeah. It's a really good question. So look to the tissues that might be causing that restriction. So your thumb is your friend. Your thumb and your finger are your friends. So the thumb can come onto the front of the hip. And Diana, this is going to be useful for you as well. The thumb can come onto the top of so find the top of your iliac crest, the top of your iliac bone, it's like your Mickey Mouse ear, and let the thumb just rest on the top of that bone, and you'll feel, this is the inguinal ligament, so it's quite dense stuff, it's quite tough stuff, and it's a multi-directional function junction that's going on here. So there are tissues that are going to take you down the outside of the leg, down the front of the leg, but also up across the front of your tummy as well. So if you let the thumb just rest at the top there and just notice how the tissues feel, and you can just go over the top of the bone into sort of the side of the waist, that's sort of like the top, into the squashy bit, if you like. And you can just notice what the tone of the tissues is like there. And you can just make this sort of smoothing action, a bit like you would do with Wednesday or with a cat, that sort of stuff. It's gentle like that. And you can go up towards the ribs. And what you should find is that the sit bone and that side of the hip will start to drop away towards the floor. And then you can just take the thumb and just keep repeating that nice strokey motion down the front of the iliac bone. So now you're going sort of down towards the pubic bone, but you're always going in towards the center of the tummy. And again, as you come down through these different tissues and take your time here, you'll find that the outer side of the hip starts to drop down, and it changes the tone of the tissues. Now you're going to have bits that are nice and squashy, and you're going to have bits that are not so squashy. And there's certainly a part in the top of my hip that is hanging on for dear life. But when I'm getting down towards the front and going down towards sort of that front groins and the hip, that's a lot softer. And then we can use the finger, so the index finger, and just find the front of the hip and just let it drop into the crease between the front of the thigh and the front of the hip. And we can just use the weight of the finger into the hand there to create a little bit of space. You can do this with the finger and the thumb together as well. And you let the finger and the thumb drop into that crease, and then you separate them. You take them apart and you create, it's almost like creating a physical space in the front of the hip. Is this making sense?
Yes.
Is that what in Iyengar days you do with the dressing gown belt? If you know what I mean, standing up. Yes. Okay.
Yes. So letting yeah, exactly that. It's the other end of the chain, if you like, but letting the foot drop into the sling then allows the hip flexor to disengage and creates space in the front of the hip, and the leg sort of rests back into the sling in the back of the pelvis, in the back of the hip. Remember that your legs are slung around the back of the pelvis. We have, hip flexors and groins that hang on for dear life on the front, but actually we've got legs that can drop back into those slings, or into that sling on the back of the hip, and it disengages the front and creates a little bit more space. And creating space in the tissues on the front allows for more hip mobility, if that makes sense. You know, the rotations of the hips aren't inhibited by the bone, ball and socket joint. They're inhibited by the muscles, the tissues, and there are a lot of them. You know, there's quite a lot of strapping, if you like, holding the it's quite a lot of strapping holding the ball in the socket. The detective work that we're into is which one isn't letting go, which one is hanging on. And a lot of the time the culprit, if you like, so that the hip, the bit that we're focused on is the mobility or the range of mobility in one of the hips, but actually the culprit is usually, this is a sweeping generalization, somewhere up in the waist. So either psoas isn't doing its job, one of the obliques isn't, you know, it's not one of them is not doing their job, because that's not possible. Something in the sequencing is a little bit off, if that makes sense. So sort of psoas into the obliques, or, you know, maybe one of the QLs is a little bit tight, but generally something up in the central core system isn't doing its job as well as we would like. And of course, in the incidence of intervention there, so that would be C-section, appendix scars, the abdominal surgeries, back surgeries, that sort of stuff. If we've carried lots of babies, not mentioning any names, but you know who you are, this can throw out the psoas and the psoas structures, and you know, those sorts of things, because we don't tend to carry babies straight down the middle. We've got, you know, babies tend to lay on one side of the pelvis, and that leaves its mark on the body. And we're not symmetrical anyway. So having a look at the system as a whole, you know, look at the problem causes the question. So the problem is a lack of mobility on one hip side, but we look at that whole structure. So we would look at the hip, but then how is that plugging into the side of the waist, and what's happening in there? Have we got scars in there? Have we got bits and pieces that might be a little bit off there? Can we offer a little bit of support, a little bit more of integrity? We'll look at how to do that in a second. And then how are the shoulders presenting to the floor? That's the complete line, because your hip is going to go across your body into the opposite shoulder, into the opposite hand. So look at the body as the functioning whole. The glitch in the system is the hip, but how is the rest of the system, how is the rest of the line firing? Does that make sense? It's good. But, you know, using our hands, we're going to do this in the workshop as well, but using our hands to start to feel around in the tissues and notice where, you know, maybe things aren't as spacious as they could be, and let the weight of the body, as we feel that things are a little bit tight or a little bit, you know, caught up, and we let the thumb sink into that, what's the response? Can the hip then roll away a little bit more, drop away a little bit more, become a little bit more relaxed around the socket? And what do we need to support that? Because you might find that now the tummy into the underside of the diaphragm is starting to fire a little bit more. Maybe we've got a little bit more core happening. Rectus abdominis might be getting involved, and the top of the obliques, that sort of stuff. When things are glitchy, it's because it's not supported well, if that makes sense. So we want to look at how are the ribs coming in, how is the tummy working in order to support that leg, so that it's got permission then to let go and rotate a little bit more. It is a practice and it takes time. This is good. So we're going to bring the feet back down, and we're going to come over gently, because we've been here a while and I can feel the back of my pelvis is beautifully broad. So just feeling the feet into the ground, particularly if you've been laying on the hard surface, is quite different to what we're used to. Feeling the feet into the ground and just taking the knees and the hips from side to side, just waking up the fascia across the back of the pelvis. We want integrity there. We'll come over onto any one side. And we're going to find our way up into our lovely square pose. And just allowing any responses to rattle through the body as they do. We're finding the front of the feet and the front of the shins, so the front of the ankles. And again, that broadness between the sit bones. And letting the tail be free. So finding the center of the palms and behind the fingers. There's the index finger, sort of between the index finger and the middle finger knuckles, as they come down into the ground. We pull that down into the ground, which just helps to bring us into the top of the shoulders. And can we just let the spine take the head? Let the jaw come into the back of the head. Again, we're looking at space, the very back of the nasal cavity, behind the root of the tongue. Can we create space at the base of the skull, the very, very top of the spine? And then notice the ripple effect that starts to happen down through the neck spine, down through the rib spine, down through the low spine. It sends the tail away eventually. Can we take time to sit in there? And what happens is that as the eyes and the tongue get drawn back, we feel that the crown of the head is drawn away. The jaw gets pulled back into behind the ears. And as that happens, can we feel the response all the way down at the other end of the spine, where we were when we were laying on our backs? They're sort of behind the pubic bone, behind the center of the tummy, where the sacrum meets the low spine. Can we let, it feels like the sacrum gets pulled away towards the wall behind you, in conjunction with the very root of the nose getting pulled away towards the wall in front of you. Can be a little bit tricky in our square pose because the wrists get grumpy long before we can feel the full effect here. So come down onto elbows if you need to. Notice the breath. The breath can help you here. So as the breath is broad, it introduces more space into the spine, but we lose integrity a little bit. And the breath out pulls the ribs into the spine and gives us a more reassured structure. And there's nothing wrong with either. They just give a different tone, a different quality to our movement. So can we take the tail, the heavy, heavy tail, and just like we were doing before, it's this little movement where the tail can come down to the heels. Be aware that the inner ankle can pull down into the ground. The more the inner ankle pulls down into the ground, the more the inner side of the knees pull into the ground, the more freedom we get at the sit bones. We can feel a bit more broadness in the sit bones. We can feel a bit more freedom to the tail, because actually the tail isn't free. There's a lot of really dense ligamentous material there that pins the, it's more like strapping actually, that straps the tail to the sit bones and the outer side of the hips. So freeing, or feeling like we can free the tail and let the tail float up towards the sky and just unfurl. We talk about the drawbridge of the sacrum and the coccyx, but if we really let the coccyx start to have its own space, if we really let the sit bones have their own space, and that deeply affects the inner and outer edges of the knees, and it deeply affects the front of the shins and the inner and outer edges of the ankles. So let your attention be drawn there. Let the body lead you on a little journey down through the legs into the feet, because the more broadness and the more freedom we get here, the easier it is at the neck and the head. And then maybe that draws us again into the very, very center of the spine. That crossover between T12 and the lumbars, the ribs and the lumbars. We don't spend enough time here. It's a little bit neglected. It's an emotional space. It's highly visceral. Most of the viscera are all home in here. So can we let ourselves just drop through there and just relax through the organs? And again, the nervous system takes its cues from here. And the other way, of course. It's always a two-way conversation. So we're going to let the sit bones come back towards the heels, we'll give the wrists a break. Can we leave the sit bones broad as we come back? All the way back. Just to wherever is good, but when we leave the sit bones broad, it gives us a different flavor to our child pose. And it's up to you. If the wrists are a little bit grumpy or the elbows are a little bit grumpy, you can put your hands on a chair for this one. But if it's nice to find your downward facing dog here, it's a pull from the big toes and the inside of the ankles. It's a pull from the middle finger, index finger, thumb. The pull through the feet opens the front of the groins, the front of the hips. The pull through the hands opens the underside of the rib, underside of the arms, this place where the arm connects to the ribs. There's a spaciousness and an upward lift that happens there. So just before your dog even happens, before the lift even happens, can we feel that pull down through those places? And can we feel that opening that happens into the underside of the arm? Can we feel that opening that happens into the hips? And it's interesting because, you know, particularly with our downward dog, and lots of us have practiced yoga for a long time. So, you know, the brain goes, oh, don't worry, I know where I'm going. We know what dog looks like. And we find it very easily. But can we feel, and this is where we can get a little bit intelligent about it, when we feel the pull down through the arms, and we feel that spaciousness and lift that happens into the underarm, we feel the ribs and the chest start to move. There's all this preparatory work happens that we skip over. So can we let the arms plug in to the spine through the shoulders, but can we feel the rib lift? and the sides of the waist lift, which will take you all the way down to the hips, and the hips start to lift, and that's happening through the hands, or it's driven by the hands initially. Then the feet pull down and come up through the sit bones and the groins and into the front of the hips, and it meets. Are we all old enough? We're probably all old enough to remember the Milton fluid. We're going back quite a long way. The Milton fluid advert that was on the TV, and it was like this little blue line that went over the top of everything. And as you know, I was quite young. As a kid, I was quite fascinated by that. And it's a little bit like that. It's when the hand pulls down into the ground, can we make that Milton fluid blue line? It's going to come all the way along through the underside of the arm, down the side of the ribs, down the side of the waist, because your legs plug into your pelvis. So can we feel that before anything's even moved? And the same with the feet. If we feel that the feet can pull down into the ground, it opens the back of the knee. It opens the front of the sit bones, and we feel all the muscles that are required of us. So this takes you into the central core system. And this pause makes the difference between using the legs as the prime driver for dog pose and us bypassing the central core system completely. Or can we pause just long enough that everything meets up, and now we've got arms that plug in and fire the central core system, and legs that plug in through the pelvis and fire the central core system. And now we've got a spine that's going in two directions at the same time. Exactly that, Margaret. Exactly that. We start to get space from the waist at T12. And the solar plexus pulls back towards the spine, and your downward dog comes from there. Exactly that, Joanna. It just feels like it floats up. It's a... and it's strong. Play with this for long enough, it will make you sweat. Because we get deep into the central core system. We start to wake up these muscles. So thinking again, what you said, Joanna, about, you know, that hip mobility, those bits and pieces where that's not quite there yet. When we start dropping back into that sort of, you know, that T12 area, and we start driving our movement from that top of the waist here, this gives the hip the freedom that it's looking for. Does that make sense? And you might find, and this is an interesting part with our downward dog, that one side is floating easier than the other. And we can see then what it shows us is the answer to the question, if this is a bit glitchy and it's not as mobile as I would like it to be, where in the side of the waist is not firing as much? And you'll be able to feel that in these movements, because when we pull down through the feet, we've got one sit bone that will lift and float away and take the waist with it, or as it is on my right side too, so matchy matchy. On the right side, it's just a bit, this is a great sound effect for that side, but it's just a bit soggy is probably, but it's a concerted effort, because now I have to go back, get into the big toe, into the inside of the ankle, and it's a concerted effort to plug the leg into that hip. I know he's very excited. Into that hip and give it the lift, and then we can consciously fire that side of the waist. We can see the differences between the two sides, and then we can do something about it because we pause long enough. Does that make sense? Yeah, this is good.
And it's coming from the same side. It's not one of those cross. I mean, obviously everything crosses and goes down the same side, but I noticed that side of my waist where that hip is more constricted, is that waist is different to the other side. It looks
because
different.
And because I know you and your history as well, the puckering in the scar on that side is probably going to be your culprit. And for those of us that have had children as well, we know that babies lay on one side particularly. So if you've carried baby on that side, and as in, you know, other people's case, they've gone back for round 2 and 3, or maybe even 4 and 5, if you're really lucky. You know, then we've got the side of the abdomen that is more able to cradle. And this is a sweeping generalization, so don't take it completely as book. But because the liver is on the right side, there's less moving parts. So babies tend to sit in the right side, because on the left side, of course, we've got the stomach, and the stomach, you know, when we eat, the stomach expands and then it contracts again. So we've got more component moving parts on one side than the other. But like I say, that is a very sweeping generalization. It is not true all the time. But Jen, you know, I think Jord was in there like that for most of my pregnancy. She was quite happy in her little hammock, and just hanging out on one side of the body. And you know, so, but those things are just something to consider and work with. But knowing you and the interventions that you've had there, it's very possible that it's, you know, it's a bit of protection and a bit of scar tissue in there as well. Yeah. Okay. We forgot. Ooh, so let's just come up to standing. Let's just tuck the toes under. We will get up to standing eventually. We can make some nice circles with the heels. I'm very interested in ankles at the moment. I'm aware that everybody's wearing boots. I had a message that said it was -6 the other morning. That's brutal. So we're all wearing the boots and we're all restricting our ankles quite happily. So just taking the time when we have the opportunity just to roll with the feet. And, you know, even if you're sitting watching TV and you're making circles with the feet, get that movement into the ankles, that slide and glide in the retinaculum, you know, keep those tissues hydrated. Because I'm not going to ask you to come out of your boots. It would be mean, given that that's kind of where we are with that. So grab your chair or available surface, if you use worktops and things, and we're going to have the seat pad in front of us. So just from here, because we can give the body a bit of a break, or give the hands a bit of a break, the wrists a bit of a break. So finding the feet, we're going to make some nice circles with the heel. Let the center of the foot really start to spread and soften, because as I said before, the more space we have in this center point of the foot, so sort of front of the ankle down to behind the balls of the feet, the more space we've got there, that corresponds directly with your spine, the low spine particularly. So the more we can drop through that front of the ankle into the ground, and feel like, you know, you can imagine it in your mind's eye that we've got this lovely puzzle arrangement of bones. They're all quite happily, you know, they are like a puzzle. They all fit together quite beautifully. They're a marvel of engineering. We just want a little bit of space between those interfaces. Let the heels feel like they're being drawn away towards the wall behind you. The sit bones will follow. And we keep the knees nice and soft, because what happens is the heels go back towards the wall behind you and the sit bones go back towards the wall behind you. The knees, the backs of the knees get pulled open. And again, because we're into this part of the foot and we're firing down the center of the low spine, we start to feel where the front face of the snooker ball heel, let's do this on the right side, front face of the snooker ball heel gets pulled down into the ground. Can we let the sit bone disconnect a little bit? There's a little bit of space from the hamstring and the top of the thigh, and just lengthens away. And can it draw the waist with it? And then we can do that on the left side. front of the snooker ball heel gets pulled down into the ground, and can we just feel, and it may not be so dexterous on this side, or this might be your better side, but just notice the differences in the two sides, and can we just let the waist get drawn away with it? And it's a great rebalancing exercise, because we can start to feel the muscles that are working a little bit harder on one side and not so harder on the other side. And we can maybe start to redress the balance a little bit. And we can notice how much the arches of the feet have to come in. So we've got this lovely lift to the inner side of the foot, and then we've got the lovely arch in the balls of the feet. There's 5 arches in the feet in total. So just starting to notice, you know, have we got springy arches? If we roll the feet onto their inner and outer edges, can we lift the long little toe side arch? Can we lift the big toe inside arch? Can we start to feel the balls of the feet arch? You know, there's arches in the deep center of the foot, at the front of the ankle. And notice that when we're working with those, how much of an effect that has on the pelvis and the pelvis connections to the legs. So like I say, they are dense connections between the legs and the pelvis, because of course we don't want the legs to come off.
No.
It would be bad. Bits falling off is not the way forward. We were just doing head connections, and you know, again, lots and lots of dense ligament material, lots and lots of dense fascia, and it's basically so your head doesn't fall off, which, you know, just created this ripple giggle around the room. It would be bad. So, but the downside to it is it can get a little bit stiff and a little bit sticky, and then it starts to throw other parts of the body out, because if something doesn't move, something else has to. We know this. This is good. So we're going to take a step forward to our chair, and just coming up to standing, we're just going to give the fingers a nice wiggle and make some rotations with the wrist. Give the hands a nice shake, because we've worked quite hard today. And then just taking the arms up over the head, let the shoulder blades descend the back of the body. And we're just going to take hold, you know, in this way that we do, just the thumb into the root, that squashy bit between the thumb pad and the root of the thumb and the root of the index finger. And just taking those up over the head and just drawing the arm out of the side of the ribs, the side of the waist, you know, just like we were doing in our downward dog posture, really. Can we connect the arm all the way down to its root, which of course is the iliac crest? And to answer and not answer your question, Joanna, in one fell swoop, you know, do other bits of the body affect other bits of the body? Yeah, because if we've got stiff and sticky bits at the collarbone and the shoulder here, will that affect the hip on the same side? Yeah, it does. It does. So we always seek to keep this sort of body in fluid motion as much as we can. Can we keep it as free as we can, just by noticing the bits of us that are getting a little bit caught up? So the feet pull down in response to the arms pulling up. And again, can we make space at the waist, space at the you know, this lovely V-shaped xiphoid process that takes us down into the tummy? We're always looking to create space there, and we can do that, you know, with the arms pulling the ribs off the waist. But conversely, and this is really important, particularly for those of us that have got low back pain or had low back pain intervention, the feet pull down to pull the bottom of the body in the opposite direction. because then the muscles come in, they snap back onto the inside back of the pelvis, onto the inside back of the low spine, and they support. The ligaments, complex ligaments that encase the spine, get pulled in to support the spine when everything's going in the two directions. The issue that we have, particularly when we're standing and doing these movements, is that the bottom of the body isn't doing a lot. And then we're just sort of waving the top of the body over, around on it. So we're always looking for that body-wide event. This is good. So we're going to come down to sitting or laying, if you're happy to lay down, and just take a moment. And just notice how your body feels from when you started. And just notice your breathing. How's your breathing changed from the beginning of the session?
I'm still doing it.
How do you feel? This is good. I'm giving the fingers and toes a wiggle. Making some rotations with the wrists and the ankles. Taking the arms up over the head and the legs long for a nice stretch through your body. And bringing the knees up to the chest. Give the knees a nice hug. Have a little rock from side to side. And coming over onto whichever side is comfortable for you. Turning back to sitting in your own time. Better. You've worked hard today. Go gently with yourselves. It's a pleasure as always. Stay warm. I'm coming home tomorrow, and it was like we had a look on the weather forecast, and it's like, oh, okay.
It's better than it was.
It's very deceptive here because there's brilliant sunshine outside and there's a beautiful blue sky, and it's one of those where you rush outside woefully inadequately dressed. It is a trick. So yes, there you are. Right then, my loves, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you got your gloves on.
Oh, I've been fully. I wish I could have worn a hat. I couldn't find one.
It's
cold.
It's so much warmer in Hastings than in the